Hi everyone, I'm going to walk through the new Truffle and Filecoin integration. So Truffle is a suite of development tools for Ethereum and other smart contract chains that allows you to build, test, and deploy smart contracts in a structured and simple way. So for the Truffle and Filecoin integration, we created a new Truffle command called Truffle Preserve. And Truffle Preserve allows you to preserve any kind of data to IPFS, Filecoin, or textile buckets. And the kind of data that you want to store there, for example, for an Ethereum app, could be application data or any kind of data that you do not want to have living on-chain, but you do need for your application. So the docs for the Truffle Filecoin integration can be found under Filecoin, which gives you a Filecoin quick start, getting you set up, installing Truffle, using the Truffle Filecoin box, and also preserving these files, so IPFS and Filecoin. More information about the Truffle Preserve command can be found in the regular Truffle documentation under Preserving Files and Content to Storage Platforms. So this lists preserving to IPFS, Filecoin, or textile buckets. Using the Truffle Preserve command, we can specify a path for a directory that we want to preserve and the tag, in this case IPFS. And potentially we can also add an environment name as a parameter, and that can be used to specify any kind of parameters or configuration data that is required by the plugin. So in this case, by default, it uses a locally running IPFS node, but for a production environment, for example, it could make sense to connect to Infura rather than your own local Filecoin node or your own local IPFS node. And then for Filecoin, the usage is the same. So again, we run Truffle Preserve with a path, but then the Filecoin tag, and the kind of configuration that you can add in Filecoin also includes the endpoint, but in this case also the options for a storage deal. So the price of the storage deal and the duration of the storage deal. Then finally, we also offer support for textile buckets, which is a higher level interface around IPFS and Filecoin. And this uses the buckets tag. To use buckets, you need to go through a few more steps. Namely, you need to register through the through Textile's hub tool and create an API key and a secret to use with the Truffle integration. And the configuration that you need to provide is this key and the secret, and then also the name of the bucket that you want to use for the integration. So let's see this in action. Here we have a simple Truffle project with a Truffle config file, and we pre-configured a few environments with some settings for Filecoin storage deal, some buckets information, and another production environment that only applies to IPFS. So first off, let's start an IPFS daemon, and then we can run Truffle help preserve. So this shows all the usage information for the Truffle Preserve command. And then we can run Truffle Preserve IPFS, which will connect to the local IPFS daemon, load the files that we specified, connect to the IPFS node, and then upload the files. So like we said, we can also use the production, the environment production. So then we specify that we want to use the production environment, and as we see, it's connecting to Infura instead. Now we can also run with Filecoin, and for that we'll run Ganache Filecoin, which is a local test network for Filecoin. And then we can run the same command with the Filecoin tag. And what we see is that first, actually, these files are preserved to IPFS, and then from there, they're preserved to Filecoin with the storage deal. We can do the same again for buckets. And we see that we're connecting to the Textile Buckets API, and we connect to a specific bucket, and it uploads the files again. So that's the built-in usage. Let's go back to the documentation. So it's also possible to use custom preserved recipes, and these can be implemented by any third party and then used by anyone, installed by anyone, used by anyone. And the usage of those plugins can depend on the plugin itself. So that could, for example, just be storage to some storage server, can be centralized, can be decentralized. It really depends on the plugin. And we also have some more resources to look at if you want to start implementing those custom preserved recipes yourself. Then there's also a quick overview of the truffle preserve command in the command reference.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike. I'm the main developer working on the Filecoin-flavored Ganache. For those that are not familiar, Ganache is Truffle's one-click blockchain that allows developers to quickly instantiate a blockchain on their computer and run tests against them, execute commands, transfer funds between accounts, basically to be able to simulate as if they were on a public network, but quickly, efficiently, with as many funds as they want, and things like that. Ganache supports Ethereum. Ganache UI specifically supports Corda as well. And then with Filecoin-flavored Ganache, Filecoin will be supported throughout the entire Ganache suite. Ganache has three different interfaces. There's Ganache Core, which is a Node.js library that allows people to integrate Ganache directly into their Node.js modules, which allows helping them out with unit tests that are automated through continuous integration or any other particular uses. We've seen it in a handful of different uses. There's also Ganache CLI, which allows people to use a command line interface to be able to instantiate Ganache really quickly. This would look like this, where you have a command line interface here. You would type Ganache and Filecoin, and that would quickly create some 10 random accounts for you, which is configurable. There are a lot of different options. I won't show them all here. And be able to get their private keys, and it funds them with some preset configurable amount of Filecoin. And then it starts up a Lotus simulator with an URL endpoint that you would hit as if you would any other Lotus node, as well as an IPFS simulator that just uses the JavaScript library for IPFS, so you can store files and things like that. We won't really go too much over the actual CLI interface. I will talk more about the Ganache UI interface, which is our graphical user interface for basically running the exact same thing as Ganache CLI, but with some buttons and nice views for easy viewing. Ganache UI runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and allows you to get that one-click blockchain by just, I guess, 2 clicks here, where you click this drop-down and change to Filecoin here. And we'll be creating our quick start workspace, which is your quickest way to get started. But we do have this idea of workspaces in Ganache UI where you can quickly and easily save your state of your blockchain if you wanted to use it later. For example, you wanted to have a persistent Filecoin set up with the IPFS files that you've uploaded, and you're signing off for the day, but you want to resume tomorrow. Well, you save that workspace, and tomorrow you bring it right back up, and everything as if you never left will resume right there. So we'll click this quick start workspace, and we'll see you get those 10 accounts get funded with that 100 fill there. And we'll go through each of these pages, but first what we're going to do is we're going to change it to automatically mine at a certain interval. By default, it's not enabled to mine at an interval. It just gets mined when there is stuff to mine, and it mines it instantly. And we go to the settings here. We can go and quickly change our miner to not auto mine, but to mine on an interval. We'll do it every 2 seconds. And I've got the Filecoin Network Explorer example from the Filecoin shipyard. And we can see here we've got blocks showing up. It's just connecting to our Ganache instance of with Lotus. And you can see on Ganache UI, we've got our tip sets are incrementing every 2 seconds. You have your Lotus server, which is what the network inspector is looking at. You also have your IPFS server if you wanted to manually hit the IPFS server for some reason. And we've got blocks, tip sets and blocks being mined here. You can go to tip sets page and see all of those details. You can go ahead and click on them and see that there's a block, but it doesn't have any messages. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to transfer some funds between our first account here and our second account. We've got a message already popped up here where we're just going to send a JSON RPC method directly to the Lotus endpoint to push a message. We're transferring from the first account to the second account for 1 Filecoin. So we'll see the first balance go to 99 and the second one to go to 100. Be like 98.99. There's some funds to actually facilitate the message. So if we click send here, we can see that our balances did change here. And if you go to the tip sets, we can see this on tip set 42, which I believe, oh, that's not in the response of the JSON RPC. That's okay. But you can see in tip set 42, we've got a message here. This is our block with the full CID here. We can go ahead and click through this and see that there was a message, there was a value transfer for 1 fill. You can also go to the messages page over here and see a list of the most recent messages. You can click on this and get those details as well from there. So let's go over deals. So we've got this getting mined every 2 seconds. So let's go ahead and store a file on the Filecoin network. So here in the network inspector, and I move to the markets page, and we'll go ahead and choose a file to upload. Let's go ahead and upload this tarball zip file. You can see here we have this deal is in there, and you can see that the status is changing every 2 seconds. A tip set is mined, and the status changes. And you can see in the deals page, you can see that deal every tip set every 2 seconds. We move from one state to the next state for that deal, and we're now finally in that active state for that deal. You can go to the Files tab to be able to see all of your pinned IPFS files and directly download those. So you can go ahead and click, this is that same file that we hear, that J5QX. It's that file. We didn't assign a name. The network inspector doesn't assign a name there. We can go ahead and click download here, and we can give it just a file name here. And you'll see a little progress bar that went really quickly there to show that it downloaded. If there was any errors, there would be a little message to say what the error was. And that's essentially the Ganache UI side of things.
Lua from Truffle here, and welcome to this walkthrough of the Filecoin Truffle box. In this session, we're going to look at pretty everything you need to know to get started with this box, specifically a quick primer on what boxes are, first of all. We'll look at prerequisites, so what you need to have installed locally on your computer to get everything up and running. Then how we get it, all the prerequisites set up, get it started, and a little bit on how we actually go ahead and interact with the box itself. Just before we dive in, a quick bit of background on what truffle boxes are, if you're not familiar. Really, as the wording says here, the easiest way to get started with decentralized application development. And boxes, they're part of Truffle, or at least you can install them via the Truffle command line tool. There's a Truffle unbox command, which we'll see in a moment. And the boxes themselves really can be best thought of as a combination of either a boilerplate or a scaffold to get you started with a project, and or a really great way to learn different kind of facets of the decentralized application development stacks that are out there and development lifecycle and so on. And we have a ton of different boxes, and you can just see here the new Filecoin one that's just been published. Cool. So specifically, the Filecoin box itself is really designed to give you everything you need to get started with IPFS, Filecoin, the storing of assets, all in the context of the Filecoin-flavored Ganache simulator that's, again, just gone live. And the context specifically with the box, as we'll see when we go ahead and set it up, is that of a decentralized art gallery based on NFTs. And the NFT, of course, themselves is going to be stored on the Ethereum side of things, and then all the associated assets, so the metadata, the images themselves, are going to be stored decentrally as well. And then the reference will be the CID or the hash of the underlying asset, and that's what will be stored on chain. And again, all this is in the box, and really a great way to get familiar with the development lifecycle and all the kind of requisite bits. Cool. All right. So yeah, in terms of prerequisites for this box, all listed here. And by the way, everything you're going to see in this quick session is documented in the README, typically a bit more thoroughly than I'm going to explain it. So as I go through it, it's going to be kind of quick, just to give you hopefully what you need to know to get started. But if you want to be more methodical with everything, as you can see here, everything's in this README. And more depth. And I'll close out this session with some pointers on how you can get support on the box as well. Okay, so jumping back in, prerequisites, Node.js 12 or above. I think that's the kind of lowest version that it will work with. Similarly, and you're going to have this if you've got Node 12 installed, npm 5.2 later, just because we're going to be using npx. And then this should really be cross-platform, so pretty much whatever desktop operating system you're running, we should have you covered as well. Cool. All right, so let's actually dive in to my terminal here, which I should have open. There we go. And a lot of this will be from the terminal, as you'll see as we go through. So firstly, to actually get the box installed, let me just close out that. You are just going to create a directory first, go into that directory, and then the command. I'm not going to run this just because it takes a moment, and I'll explain why. So the command is truffle unbox Filecoin. Get my brain engaged here. Run that. As you'll see, it will pull down all the component parts of the box. And the reason it takes a moment, and which is not why I'm going to do it now, is because actually it will kick off an installation of all the dependencies. So as soon as it's unboxed, simply downloaded, it will npm install that behind the scenes. You'll see that also referenced in the README, just in case for whatever reason that doesn't work and you need to get the dependencies installed. So yeah, all good. So assuming that's run, you should see everything in here. You might want to open this up in your IDE of choice as well. I won't do that now because I'll let you do that in your own time. And then really the first thing you're going to want to do once you've got everything downloaded and the dependencies installed is just do npm Ganache, because what we've got now is a Filecoin-flavored Ganache, and then this new subcommand that you'll pass in there called Filecoin. Let me go ahead and run this. See, it starts up two services, so the IPFS daemon and the Filecoin daemon. Gives you the IPs, which are all local, and the ports that they're running over. What it's also done is essentially create a Lotus node, all loaded with 10 accounts. If you're familiar with Ethereum-flavored Ganache, similarly it creates 10 accounts loaded up with Ether. In this case, it loads up 10 accounts with their public and private keys, all loaded with 100 FIL, or Filecoin token. Again, all this is obviously a simulator going on here, of course. So it's kind of step one. So if that's working, then you're in a good place. And next up, we will go ahead and create a deal or a simulated deal. So the reason you saw that earlier, this command, let me just pull a little copy of this over. And I should stress as well, there's actually two flavors or versions of the Filecoin-flavored Ganache. Firstly, there's the CLI version, which we're seeing running here in the top left window. There's also a GUI-based version, which I'll kind of start up in a moment as well. Either way, to create a deal, a storage deal, there's a few ways you can do it. They're all listed in the README as well. There's actually 3 listed. You can spin up the Filecoin Network Explorer, which gives you a kind of drag drop, or at least a means of doing it through a web browser. We have a curl command in there as well, which essentially kind of does the same thing, assuming you've got the CID for a given piece of content. And then lastly, and this is a new thing too, is there's a new command added to Truffle essentially do the same thing too. So this makes it actually a lot kind of slicker, I would say, at least if you're kind of in CLI land to do this. So what we're doing here is Truffle. This is preserve command, a new param that we're passing in, which is this concept of an environment, the path to the assets that we want to store, and then finally the flag to determine whether it's we just want to literally just store them in IPFS, and or store them in IPFS and simulate the creation of a storage deal. So let's go ahead and run this guy. Usually takes a moment. There we go. So, and the directory that I passed in here is in this box, so you'll have this locally. So you should literally be able to run this command, and all going well, it should work. And then these are all the assets that we're going to be working with in the context of the gallery that we mentioned. So what it's done there is it's added them to IPFS, got the corresponding CIDs back, and then, that's the preservation there, preserve step to IPFS at least, and then the same thing to Filecoin, or at least the creation of a storage deal. Now this all happens automatically. In the real world, there's a bit, a couple of extra steps you'd need to go through, in terms of the marketplace and so on. And the idea, of course, here is just to kind of simulate that whole process a little more kind of automatically. So that's done. So we've now got this all running, that's stored locally, and you can see a bunch of output there in the from the Filecoin-flavored Ganache, and all good. So that's our kind of assets stored decentrally, albeit simulated. Next up, which window shall I use here? We can go ahead and start up kind of traditional Ganache, as it were, or at least Ethereum-flavored Ganache, so Ganache Ethereum. And I'm not going to do this just in the spirit of time, because this is, again, all documented in the steps. But this, if we wanted to then go ahead and deploy the Ethereum contract, or the contracts for the gallery for the NFTs, the ERC-721s, steps are in there. So we'd need to, run this one, go ahead and deploy those contracts to the chain, and then mint the NFTs. But I've already done this and deployed this to a testnet, and similarly I've also deployed and pinned these assets. And the reason I'm saying that is because the kind of final thing I wanted to show, or two things actually, but firstly is this the UI for this, because as I mentioned at the start, there's a GUI component to this. So let's go down into that. You may need to check that the dependencies are installed here for this one, because this is actually a separate kind of project within the broader project here. But assuming they are, you can just go ahead and start this guy up, and this should be it running here, just reloading as the local web server started up. And this is all the kind of component bits pulled together. So these are the 4 assets that we store. That just reloaded it as the local web server started up there. And you can click into these. And this is again, idea here is just a boilerplate to get you started. Kind of play around with it, but you could easily use this for your own NFT project. And use all the kind of component bits that we've just seen to kind of walk you through and get you familiar with everything. Cool. So the other piece I wanted to show, let me just jump back to the terminal here and stop the Filecoin-flavored Ganache on the CLI. And then I've got another tab open here. So yarn start this one. Again, this is in the README, but what we're doing now is starting up the GUI-based version as well. There's other ways you can do this, which will probably update in the README very soon. But as it stands right now, at the time of this recording, this is the way. It's not hard. It's just doing its thing, and actually just essentially starting up this the app from the CLI, from the command line, versus a kind of prepackaged one. And there we go. On the right here, on my other window, which I've just dragged over, is the GUI-based version of Filecoin Ganache. Let's just go in there. This is a project I created before. Taking a moment. There we go. Cool. So as you can see here, and again, if you've used the GUI-based version of Ganache in the past, Ethereum-flavored Ganache, you would see, this would feel very familiar, but it would also look different because we've got different tabs along the top. But yeah, as we saw in the CLI version earlier, we've got the accounts that are created, or the account addresses, the tip sets as they're essentially mined, any deals that are created, no deals because essentially this is a fresh chain, files that are pinned, I think this is just the out of the box ones that get created on a new IPFS node that spins up, and then things like logs and so on. So again, also a good way to get started, particularly, you know, if you're perhaps less familiar or comfortable working on the CLI, or at least, you know, it definitely guides you through a bit more seamlessly. Cool. So with that, as again, designed here to be a brief tour. If you do have questions though, as they come up at the bottom of this README, we have a few different ways in which you can get support. So some links through to the Truffle community channels, because we have a bunch, and you can reach out and again, click through to that and you'll see that, you know, you can make a good choice as to the one that best fits. And similarly, a link through to the Filecoin's support as well. So if it's a specific Filecoin question, that might be the best bet. Otherwise, just kind of broad questions around the box or getting it set up or issues, etc. You can just reach out to us through that. So with that, that's it. So we've just seen a review of, or a brief walkthrough of the Filecoin box. You got it set up, how we got it set up, and a quick preview of what it looks like. So with that, that's the end of the session. Look forward to getting in touch and connecting.